Hey guys, Brass Facts here. This here is a general purpose rifle, and this is a carry handgun. Together they can tackle whatever life might throw at us, and probably, given how imaginative some of us are, probably a couple things that I won't. But for many of us, it doesn't stop there. What about extending the range of your 5.56 with a SPR? Maybe night vision makes up a large component of your preparedness, and you've been infected by big night vision, so how about a dedicated night gun? Maybe you live where there's on average large sightlines, so what about a CSAS in 308 or 6.5? And of course, the new current trend to evaporate your money, IARs, and maybe if you're psychotic enough, a belt fed. For the sake of brevity, and throughout the rest of the video, I'll call these specialized weapons or support guns, as they're not meant to replace a general purpose rifle, and instead are meant to be used where a specific scenario calls for them, as they excel at, well, that specific scenario due to min-maxing. We've discussed many of these setups on the channel, and I will continue to discuss them. I clearly believe it makes sense to at least consider owning maybe one or two of these depending on your needs, location, and most importantly, how much disposable income you have. However, in my time trying this out for myself, reading comments, and interacting on Instagram, Discord, and more, I've come to notice a bit of a pitfall that I've personally and others seem to fall for when setting up these support weapons and how we view them in the sort of component of firearms preparedness. A sort of support gun trap, if you will. Right before we dive in, I do want to say I am talking about tactical preparedness, where there exists some sort of expectation of maybe using one of these in a given scenario, not competition. In competition, by and large, you have a ton of guarantees that you can rely on, such that specialized weapons are not rare, they're the norm. This video is sponsored by Venture Surplus and this bag. Since I'm on the road a lot, I need to transport all of my stuff. And the one thing that is actually generally a pain in my butt is transporting all of my nylon gear. First world YouTuber problems, I know, right? This is a surplus duffel bag, and it works excellently as a single solution carry-all item. In the setup right now, I have my spare parts bin, my chest rig, my other chest rig, a plate carrier, and a whole-ass assault pack. Yes, I have a bag in my bag. But you don't have to use it for that. Bags are multi-purpose, you know? Anyway, use my discount code for 10% off. Back to the video. The first and biggest trap of those that invest heavily into these support guns is to ignore the deployment problem. No one argues that a 6.5 Creedmoor CSAS type gun will be better than a 5.56 M4 in a 700-yard lead throwing contest. An exclusive night gun setup is easier to use, well, at night, and a bag or car deployable 5-inch 300 blackout sure is preferable to a 9mm handgun in a CCW context. The issue here isn't how well that gun matches the given scenario, that part's easy, it's how did the gun show up to that specific scenario. With the car or bag gun, does your envisioned scenario account for the fact that the firearm has a half-a-minute deployment time, assuming you're even near your car? For the 6.5 CSAS, have you considered the burden of getting a 16-pound gun to a final firing position, and how that weapon is somewhat of a burden in a medium to close-range gunfight? For the belt fit or IAR, there sure is a lot of available firepower on tap, but how much time and effort have you put into the ammo logistics problem? I'm not saying any of these issues are not solvable. They very much are solvable. What do you think half the point of my videos are? But if you just sort of expect these weapons to teleport into your hands when they're needed, or your deployment plan is just to happen to be next to the gun when something kicks off, well, then I'll argue you'll never actually use one of these in a given scenario, and as a result you're spending a lot of time, money, and effort for something that ultimately will just end up as an expensive range toy. Which is not the worst thing of all time, but that gets us to the larger subcomponent of this fallacy, and man, I probably notice this about once a week in conversation. Many individuals will begin to compromise their go-to setup with the expectation that their support guns will handle the scenarios they're built for. How many people have you seen run a very compromised general purpose setup with the assumption that, well, if I need to shoot beyond 100 yards, I have my SPR? Or the lack of night vision on their general purpose rifle despite having a very night vision centric plan because, well, I'll just switch to my night vision gun if things go dark. Or those that compromise their concealed carry gun because, well, if they need more, well, they have their car gun to fall back on. And probably the most prolific one, those that train and spend all their effort on a G19 style handgun only to carry a very hard to shoot slimline handgun that they can't shoot well at all with the expectation that, well, if things get sketchy, I'll plus up to the bigger gun. That's not how that works. Even if you put in the effort to have a solid deployment plan, deployment is proactive. You, as a civilian, will very often, even in the most insane, end-of-the-world type scenarios, will most often be reactive. And if you don't have a deployment plan, well, you've nerfed the hell out of yourself with really no upside whatsoever. These support guns are not just limited by their difficulty to deploy, they're also very much a min-maxed, not versatile setup, which gets us to the second trap. Min-maxing generally originated from video games where one would maximize a specific character, usually in a role-playing type game, where in theory you could build out your character to do everything, but it is far more beneficial to have a character specialized in a specific role and then having a bunch of other specialized characters support each other, making up for their weaknesses. This works extremely well because stats in these games very much are multiplicative, so the more of the same stat that you can stack on top of each other, well, the more benefits you can get. And this exact logic quite often is used to justify DMRs, IARs, belt feds, and, well, you name it. Attachment, caliber choices, weapon choices, all stacked together to make these very appealing and effective in their specific niche. And at least in the military, you have a fairly large team to cover and make up for the weaknesses of these setups, allowing for specialized weapons to actually elevate the squad or platoon or company as a whole. Unfortunately, this logic only partially carries over to the civilian space. Even in the scenarios that have gone far enough down the preparedness pyramid and the situation actively calls for a specialized weapon, and you've done the deployment homework, a support weapon may still be the wrong call given how much they force the user to act and use the weapon in a specific way. There are just things that are very difficult for a dude with a 16-pound DMR to do, and there are ways a team must act to actually utilize an IAR or, God forbid, a belt fed. Once again, not saying there aren't scenarios where the answer is yes, give me that belt fed, give me that CSAS, but there are just as many where a basic rifle is not just fine, but the preferable choice due to the versatility, flexibility, and speed of the weapon. People like to use the term jack of all trades, master of none as a demerit, but that actually forgets the whole phrase. It's jack of all trade, master of none, but often better than the master of one. And that gets us to the final aspect and the final sort of fallacy or trap of these support guns. Support guns require a ton of training, time, money, and effort, and most require some team interplay, so that also means you need to train with your team, and that's a lot of work. But because these excel in their given role and require a ton of work, time, money, and effort, a lot of people assume there should be a proportional payout for it. But I think you've perhaps realized most of these are very niche to begin with, while also being very difficult to get into play, so to speak. So I don't want to say these are not worth the squeeze, but they are very much an expensive investment for a very specific, narrow use case. Preparedness is often a losing battle of trying to decide where limited funds and time go, so it's important not to get caught up in the current trend, and to be honest that, yeah, these are very capable weapons, but the thing X, Y, or Z influencer is currently dabbling is probably going to be very limited in practice. This is why so often with these setups I actually look to de-specialize them a bit, make them a little less good at their primary task to make them more generally versatile so the deployment, usage, or whatever is less niche and burdensome. It explains why, despite the relative lack of performance, I think something like a 5.56 XPR is still far more relevant than, say, a large, heavy 6.5 Creedmoor. Or why platforms like 6ARC, which essentially can be used both as a basic fighting rifle but also brings a ton of capability to the table, well, a sort of cake and eat it too setup. Just ignore the fact that the cake has pockets of malfunctioning mold and costs $3,000. But do not feel compelled to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, or fall for the trap of, if you don't have a belt fed or you don't have drones, you will die. It's just not the case. A solid red-blooded American with a carbine, a little bit of magnification, and a solid skill set to back it is 95% of the problem set. Everything else is just gravy. Good, tasty gravy, but still gravy. Anyways, that's enough of brass facts rambles about SHTF game theory from a completely unqualified position. So, I don't know. This one might have been a little boring, I think. I don't know, maybe, let me know. But it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, so yeah, I just sent it. I also did audio only because I've had the realization that people only listen to these ones, so yeah, might as well make the audio quality better and still trying to sort of dictate off of the couch in my living room. Anyways, it's been fun. Later.
It's the end of the trip. Nova just wants to leave.
Go girl.
Another trip in the books. Nova, you ready to go to the van? One last poop for the road?